Hello and welcome to the Scottish Football Show. Coming up this week, coefficient, more like co-inefficient, am I right? We try to get to the bottom of just why our teams have been so bad in Europe this season. 100 goals spanning across 12 years. Is one club man James Forrest a dying breed? And VAR is here. Ahead of schedule, what could possibly go wrong? Yes, hello, I am your host, Laura Brannan, stepping up to the hot seat in Andrew's absence this week. Joining me as ever, though, is football editor and filmmaker and my podcast wingman, Findlay Marks.
Hello. I thought that was a very good attempt at Andrew's hello that you did on the top of the show. Well done.
Channeling my inner slaving. It's one Andrew out and one Andrew in as we welcome a new face, or should that be voice, to the show this week. Sky Sports Andrew Dickson is also joining us. Hello.
Hello, yeah, not a new face, certainly a very, very old face, and probably not a straight swap either, because although it's one Andrew for another, that would mean me scalping the other Andrew, because I'm very, very bald as well. So, but yeah, thanks for having me on. Good to join in.
Absolutely nothing wrong with having another baldy on the show, Andrew, let me tell you. It's a terrific haircut you've got, terrific. Very aerodynamic, very efficient.
Let's get started right away. What has been happening this week in the weird and wonderful world of Scottish football? Finn, what have you seen happening?
I think my favourite thing from over the last week or so was, I don't know if you saw this, but in the Arbroath Hospitality Suite, one of the prizes ended up being a signed Fray Bentos pie by Bobby Lynn, man of the match. So you can't ever say that Arbroath don't know how to do a good prize.
That's kind of one of those things as well, isn't it, though, where like if it's signed, are you then going to eat the pie or do you keep the pie because it's a signed pie? I can't say I've ever had a signed pie, but yeah, I mean, I would imagine that you might not be eating that one.
Yeah, surely you would keep that on your mantelpiece, a signed Bobby Lynn Fray Bentos pie. Definitely, I'd be doing that.
Andrew, what have you seen this week?
Yeah, so Rangers obviously humbled by Liverpool in the Champions League last midweek, and Alan Hutton, I don't know if this was put together before or after the game, but certainly the article that I've seen is after the game, where he's done a joint Rangers and Liverpool 11, which incredibly features 6 Rangers players and only 5 Liverpool players. So, which is, yeah, I would assume that he picked this side before, certainly before the game at Ibrox. If it's only appeared in the last week or so, then maybe after the game at Anfield. But yeah, quite generous towards Rangers, because I think there's no sign of Bobby Firmino up front, no Alisson Becker, it's Alan McGregor. James Tavernier gets in ahead of England right back Trent Alexander-Arnold. So Alan Hutton doing his bit for his old team, I think it's fair to say.
He's definitely avoided the contentious one, which, you know, for me was, do you go with Mo Salah or Scott Wright on the right-hand side? And, you know, he's erred on the side of caution there and gone with Mo Salah. So I think he's probably been proven right on that.
I think the one for me this week was Lee Johnson's post-match comments after losing 6-1 to Celtic. He was sitting in the press room after the game saying that his players should be knocking on the door to Celtic's dressing room and asking them for their shirt, and asking them how they did it and how they actually won the game 6-1. I just thought this was really odd, because your players shouldn't really be asking the opposition players how they did it. Is that kind of not Lee Johnson's job, to teach his players how to win games by 6 goals? Like, what is it with coaches nowadays, that just head coaches that don't want to coach?
It's a bit of a bizarre one as well, because, you know, if you're a Hibs fan and you're hearing that, I mean, of course, Hibs most of the time are going to be expected to go to Celtic and lose. At the same time, though, I think, you know, people have pride in their team and they don't really want to be hearing the kind of, almost the awe that would come across as, I suppose, from Lee Johnson towards Celtic, about, oh, how good they are and all the rest of it, you know. It's a bit of an odd one. I think if I was a Hibs fan, I'd be a little bit upset with that.
We've said so many times this season, Lee Johnson's had some interesting comments in the press. After their 1-0 defeat to Dundee United last midweek, he said, I can't be too displeased with the performance. On the data, percentile-wise, it was a win, although it wasn't. So he's the king of an interesting quote.
God. Well, in proper news, we've got the small matter of the League Cup quarter-finals this week, kicking off with Kelly hosting Dundee United on Tuesday night. Andrew, this is a slightly different match for both sides to when the draw was made a few weeks ago, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a little bit. Obviously, Dundee United have had a bit of a bounce. Liam Fox coming in and what is it? I think a couple of defeats now in their last 7 matches. Kelly have kind of avoided defeat in the last 3 as well. So although both of them are at the bottom end of the Premiership, both of them will quite fancy it, I would have thought. I think Kelly are going for their first cup semi in 10 years, I think I read. So, you know, and Dundee United have obviously had a taste of doing quite well in cup competitions in more recent years. So, you know, I mean, both of those sides will fancy it. The League Cup obviously doesn't carry the same prize, if you like, as it used to in terms of European football, and it's been like that for a long time now. But at the same time, it's the way the season starts. It's a competition which has a degree of importance in that respect in the summer, and to get through to this stage and the chance to get to Hampden, you know, both of them will look at the draw and think, well, you know, why can't it be us? Obviously Rangers and Celtic so far have avoided each other, but if they were to both progress or one of them was to get knocked out in this round, then it opens up for all the other teams as well to take one of those final slots. So yeah, a pretty even tie, to be honest.
Talking of those other teams, we've got Motherwell against Celtic on Wednesday night at the controversial early time of 6:15. Aberdeen and Partick Thistle play, and then it's Rangers versus Dundee. Finn, any of those ties catching your eye?
I think Motherwell Celtic will be the interesting one. It's always interesting when one half of the Old Firm has an away game, because I think it just kind of elevates the cup tie a little bit, doesn't it? There might be slightly more of a chance of an upset happening there. Motherwell have had a few run-ins with Celtic in this competition in recent years, even at the final stage. So it'll be something that they will hopefully fancy themselves for. I think Aberdeen versus Thistle is interesting as well. Thistle going great guns at the top of the Championship. Aberdeen at home have been pretty good this season, but you just don't know which team's going to turn up on the night, so that could be really interesting as well. Rangers versus Dundee is the other tie. I don't think many people will see anything past a Rangers win.
They're looking to finish it here, and they have. And that's the end of Celtic's Champions League dream. Celtic 0, RB Leipzig 2.
In it goes, Jota couldn't get the goal, but Harvey Elliott can. 6 becomes 7. Rangers run in the Champions League is over. It's finished. Rangers 1, Liverpool 7.
Gonzalez accepts the responsibility. Perfect. A 4-goal cushion re-established, and it's more agony for Craig Gordon and Heart of Midlothian. It is 5.
It was another deeply disappointing week for Scottish clubs in Europe. But as much as we'd love to put it behind us, we're still talking about it a week on. And that's because of just how bad it was. Hearts are out completely after their 5-1 away defeat to Fiorentina. That meant they can't finish above third place in their Europa Conference League group now. Celtic are also out of the Champions League after their 2-0 home defeat to RB Leipzig. And Rangers also dropped out of the competition after a humiliating 7-1 loss at the hands of Liverpool. Albeit, both sides still stand a chance of dropping down to the Europa League, but that doesn't excuse the manner in which these sides have performed so far. Let's focus on Rangers first. Andrew, this was a record-breaking defeat for the club. Worst ever in Europe, worst ever at Ibrox. Like, as someone who works in the media, what has the fallout of this been like over the last week?
Well, I think probably quite predictably, there's questions being asked of the manager's position. I was at the game at Ibrox, and I think when it got to 3-1, at that point you're looking at it and thinking, oh, this could actually get a bit hairy. And then it goes to 4 and 5, and the goals come quite quickly. And at 7-1, I turned round to leave the press box, and one of the newspaper journalists there said to me, does Gio survive this? And it hadn't really crossed my mind until that point, but it was a very, very legitimate question. You know, Steven Gerrard had almost 200 games in charge of Rangers now. It's a bit of a strange one because I don't think Gerrard would ever have got Rangers to the Europa League final like Giovanni Van Bronckhorst did last season. But by the same token, Steven Gerrard's Rangers side never ever got embarrassed on the park. It never lost in, I think it was 193 games Gerrard had, and they never lost by more than 2 goals. Van Bronckhorst, I think, has had 61 and has lost by more than 2 goals 5 times. Now, I think Gerrard lost by 2 goals and no more than that 5 times in those near 200 games, you know. So it's a bit of a strange one, because Van Bronckhorst, the highs have been really high, getting to the Europa League final and beating the likes of Dortmund and Leipzig on the way, but the lows are crushing lows. And, you know, I think understandably people are looking at his team and saying, well, why is that happening?
Yeah, like Finn, we witnessed Mo Salah scoring the fastest hat-trick in Champions League history. Was this just a case of Rangers simply aren't at this level?
I think very much it's probably the case that Rangers just aren't at this level. I think the jump from Europa League to Champions League is just so enormous. It's the biggest jump you can make competitively at club level, I think, anywhere in the world. I don't think there's any other competition where there's that chasm between the clubs right at the very elite end of a competition and even the other clubs that are participating in it. The fact that it's been over a decade since Rangers were in this competition, and the fact that I think in that decade, the last 10 years, that chasm that I've been talking about has grown greater than at any other point in football history. I think the gap between the clubs right at the top end, Liverpool, Man City, PSG, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, those kind of clubs, and everybody else is far bigger. When you look as well at results like this, I think the thing is that they're not an anomaly. Like, results like this happen almost on a season-by-season basis in the Champions League. Even in the last 10 years, you've had Shakhtar Donetsk, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, Barcelona, Liverpool twice, PSG, Man City. In fact, Liverpool 3 times now, scoring 7 or 8 goals in a Champions League group game. And these are against sides that are at a high level of European football. They're historic names in European football. So teams like Malmo, Celtic, Maribor, Spartak Moscow, Schalke, Barcelona even, Roma, I think in recent seasons as well, have all been at the end of some absolute batterings in the Champions League. But it does happen by virtue of the financial gap that's there between these top-end teams and the kind of the also-rans. Also, if you look at these teams domestically, these results aren't freak results either. You know, you quite often get 9s and 7s and 6s in the Premier League with these teams being involved. So I think it's just a marker of, it doesn't excuse the result, but it's just a marker of how vast that financial gap is between a team like Rangers and the teams at the very, very top tier of the competition.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't excuse it. Like, it's a one-off game. So I don't know if we've been arguing, I think, all week about this in our own group chat, that one-off game versus the money involved, does it really excuse it? But, I mean, let's not forget, Rangers were leading in this game. Okay, it was only for 7 minutes, but defeat's one thing. It's the manner in which the floodgates opened that is causing such a concern, isn't it? Because if Rangers had just went into that match and lost to Liverpool, like 2-3-0, the same as like the away leg, no one would really have said much about it. It would just have been that predictable, okay, Rangers lost a better team. But it was the fact they just crumbled. And it just showed that lack of everything. It was just everything went wrong. And that's truly a cause for concern.
The word that's been used is capitulation, and it's maybe been levelled at Rangers in a few games that they've kind of chucked it. I don't love using that phrase, but, you know, you can't really look at games like, say, the Napoli game at Ibrox and say Rangers chucked it, because, you know, they were down to 10 men and Napoli scored 2 of their goals quite late on. Just in the same way that, you know, St Mirren didn't chuck it at Ibrox a couple of weeks ago. It's just the fact that, you know, one team has a better calibre, better level of players, and they've got different gears to go up. To me, a capitulation, like chucking it, is when you just stop doing the basics. You stop tracking, you stop trying, you stop going into tackles, because you're just like, well, we've lost anyway, you know, and the head goes that way. We saw it with Dundee United, which we talked about in previous episodes when they were in the Netherlands and they lost by a similar scoreline. It was that same thing. It's like, you're just like, it looks like you're sleepwalking through the game now. And I think that's the thing that's a massive concern for Rangers fans, is that under Giovanni Van Bronckhorst, there have been, maybe not by the same scoreline, but there have been games where you've seen the team chuck it like that. It's like their heads are almost saying, well, we've lost the game anyway, what's the point of trying to get back into it? And that's not something the fans will accept.
That's a big thing for Rangers as well, is the fact that what you're saying there, Finn, about, you know, a couple of 3-0s against Celtic and Napoli, a 4-0 against Celtic, 4-0 at Ajax, 7-1 against Liverpool. Rangers are now building a track record of being a team that, you know, to use that phrase about chucking it, you know, whether you say that or the heads have gone or, however politely you put it, that's essentially what's happened. I don't know if it was a psychological thing. They've lost Goldson, who has been such a rock for basically the whole time he's been at the club. Suddenly he goes off injured, and poor Leon King, he's played a few games this season. He played at the weekend and did relatively well against Motherwell, but suddenly 18 years old, you're pitched in with Salah coming in off the right and Darwin Nunez and various other players coming at you. I mean, that's a baptism of fire, I think, is the cliche for that particular situation. As well as the injury situation, you have players who aren't featuring when people expect that they might be featuring. You've got players who maybe aren't in the best of form. There are so many issues for Rangers at the moment now. So what I said earlier on about kind of limping through to the World Cup, if they can do that and hang on in a domestic sense, obviously Europe is gone, and personally it's going to take a minor miracle to get above Ajax in the group. I just don't see that happening. But you know, in a domestic sense, they have to just hang in there for the next 3 or 4 weeks, hopefully get to the World Cup from their perspective, and then it gives them a month to come back after the break for the World Cup and go into the Christmas run in much better shape than they are at the moment.
Well, just one final point just before we open it up onto the other clubs, because I think this is something that was overlooked just in the detritus of the result and the manner of it and everything, was that Van Bronckhorst still doesn't know his best team, and it seems to be this constant chopping and changing. I can't remember if Rangers have actually named the same starting 11 one game to the next so far this season. And there was a really peculiar point in the match. I think it was 3-1 to Liverpool at that point, and he made a triple substitution where he changed his entire front three. And I think even just to the most non-tactically minded of fans, that's a head scratcher, because he wouldn't do that at home, you know, to Dundee United or something like that. If the game's a bit tight, why on earth would you do it against one of the best attacking teams in the world? Like, why wouldn't you bring on a more defensive and try and shut up shop? It was a really peculiar thing, but I think it was symptomatic of, I don't think even Van Bronckhorst knows tactically what he's doing at the moment. It kind of just feels like flinging muck at the wall and seeing what sticks. Remarkably,
though, despite all that, Rangers could still actually finish third and stay in Europe past Christmas.
Not a chance.
But they're playing Napoli next, who have got 4 wins from 4 and are destroying the group right now. So that's probably not going to happen. Let's open this up wider then to the other teams that have also been doing badly. Look, we all expected Rangers to have a response of some sort at the weekend. They didn't. They stumbled over the line against Motherwell. It was poor, to say the least. Celtic, on the other hand, though, put 6 past Hibs and had it wrapped up within the first 20 minutes of the game. What does that say about the difference between the two sides right now? What's Celtic doing right in that sense domestically, that they can just switch off from the bad result midweek in Europe and get right back on it again in the league as if nothing's happened?
I think for me it's two things. One's identity and the other's confidence. I think it's two things that Celtic have shown that they have in spades. You know, they have a very clear, strong identity whilst playing under Ange Postecoglou. And no matter what the starting lineup is, you know, we'll talk about James Forrest in a little minute, no matter who's coming in to play in a certain position, everybody knows what the role is, and there's a trust in the manager, and that breeds confidence. So it's a self-perpetuating thing, and I think it's just exactly what we've just spent quite a bit of time talking about for Rangers. It's the inverse of that. I don't think that seems to be a huge amount of trust and confidence in the system, whatever that is that Van Bronckhorst is trying to implement. And Rangers are a confidence team. Like, we've seen this at so many points in the past, and they have been this way for the last number of years under Gerrard as well. They need to be feeling confident about themselves before they can really be hitting their top gear. I think that's the biggest thing.
So it's almost kind of sad as well, to an extent, that Celtic and Rangers have both grabbed the headlines this week for being so bad, that we've kind of glossed over the fact that Hearts lost 5 goals as well and crashed out. It's almost as if it was like just expected, and I kind of feel like that's a shame in terms of just Scottish football in general, that we just kind of accept that the smaller club of the three, they're just in it for the group stages. They're not really going to progress. It's just like a matter of when they drop out rather than if. And I think that's kind of unfortunate, isn't it, from a kind of Hearts perspective?
I think if you look at the overall record for Scottish clubs this season, it's 4 wins and 22 ties. I think when you look at that, and you know, I mean, the coefficient has gradually built and got better. This season it's taken an absolute battering. I think for Hearts it was always going to be difficult. I mean, I watched the Hearts game last week against Fiorentina, watched them against Istanbul a few weeks back as well, and on both occasions they were very well beaten, but I think the expectation there realistically was that was probably going to happen. It was a strange game for Hearts because they hit the post in 33 seconds. I think Humphreys hit the post. He had another good chance in the later in the first half, and then scored early in the second half as well. So actually Hearts had a bit of a go, but you know, at the same time were 4-0 down at half time. So I think they were always expected to lose that one. And you know, I think if you look at the league, whereas Hearts were by far and away the standout third place team last season, you're seeing the fact that they're having to play midweek European ties and they're having to go to Turkey and go to Latvia and go to Italy. You know, suddenly they're what, I think sixth at the moment, I think they are, in the table. Hibs and Aberdeen have moved ahead of them, which it probably says something about Hearts as well, the fact that they've been quite inconsistent in the league. But it's difficult getting that balancing act, and I think if you look at the wider European situation, and particularly Rangers' form in the previous 4 seasons, they played 64 European games in that time, an average of 16 a year, gradually getting better all the time. Expectation levels rise as a result of that, but I think what they have done in that time has exceeded what Scottish clubs traditionally do. I'm not saying that we're back to the norm this season. 4 wins out of 22 is really not very good at all. Probably something in the middle of where we are now and what Rangers have done in the last 4 years would be the norm. But there's definitely been a recession, and it was probably to be expected that Hearts would struggle, especially when you kind of look at earlier in the season where Motherwell have gone out early and Dundee United have as well.
I think you see the impact of it as well on the squads too. So Hearts have, I think, is about 11 injuries they've got to their squad at the moment. I think Rangers have about 12 as well, and Celtic have a good number as well. So you can see the impact that playing at this level has on these teams as well. I think it's to do as well with the volume of games these teams are playing in Europe. It takes time to get used to it. This was something that I mentioned a couple of weeks ago when Jurgen Klopp was talking post-match after Rangers' defeat at Anfield, which was that he was saying, you know, Rangers have done well in the Europa League over the last couple of years, but this is the Champions League, and it will take time to get used to playing at this level. This is just the nature of life at the top table, and I don't just mean the Champions League here. I mean all levels of European competition and competing at it regularly, because teams that are now established as European teams have taken their beatings, have had to bank the money and try to learn whatever lessons they could in the time where they've grown and adapted to learning how to live in these competitions. It's a gradual process. It's an ugly one. It's not pretty. It's not fun for a lot of times, but it's because that jump is so big. You look at a team like Dundee United. Dundee United have played 4 European matches in a decade. That's it. And I think Motherwell, you know, slightly more. They've played something, you know, probably like half a dozen in a decade. But it's hard. Like, how are you supposed to implement those lessons when it's such a different type of football as well, from domestic Scottish football to playing a team in Europe? It's a completely different ball game most of the time, and it takes time to adapt to that.
We can't be having that, mate. You better get your finger out, all right, and make sure that you get the results.
Let's take a look back now on what the weekend's games gave us. Now, we touched a wee bit on Celtic beating Hibs 6-1, but it was James Forrest that really hit the headlines here. Let's look at some stats, right? He has got 20 trophies, 10 league titles, 5 League Cups, 5 Scottish Cups, and now he's hit the 100 goal mark as well after his hat-trick against Hibs. He's one of the most decorated players in Scottish football history. Never mind Celtic's, at least in modern times anyway. I don't know about you guys, but it feels like Forrest has slipped off the radar a wee bit recently and just sort of became a bit of the Celtic Park wallpaper. But this is an incredible list of stats, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, absolutely. When you look at that 20 trophies, it's actually a pretty incredible haul that he's got there. I mean, I saw a statistic over the weekend that obviously he's got his 100 goals, and I think he's on 99 assists now. If he gets to 100 assists, which you would imagine he would do at some point, I think he's only the third Celtic player to do it, alongside Henrik Larsson and Jimmy Johnson, which gives you an idea of the kind of company that he's keeping there.
I don't know if it's something to do with maybe the fact that he looks like he's still about 14 years old, is that people kind of don't think of him as being one of these players that's had like a long and illustrious career. But he has. I mean, he's had his injury problems over the last couple of years, and it's maybe only with injuries to the likes of Abada that he's maybe getting more of a look in recently. But the thing is, like, you still need to keep yourself fit. You still need to be ready to come into the team doing it, and there's no better way to show that you're doing that than with a hat trick. I think with Forrest as well, it's been a bit of a shame because there were definitely points where at an international level as well, he was such an important part of what Scotland were trying to do. You remember back to, was it against Israel that he scored a hat trick, or Albania?
Albania, I think it was, yeah.
It was the game that got us to the, pretty much, I don't know if it was the one that actually sealed the playoff place against it. Yeah, because we get out the group against Israel and Albania, but played Israel in Serbia.
Right,
so
yeah,
he had a massive part to play in that game.
He was huge, yeah, and so he has done it at all levels for club and country, and he's been an amazing servant to Celtic as well. But it's looking like he could be a really important part still of that story going forward for Celtic this season. A
player like James Forrest should really thrive in that team as well. You know, you've seen it with Leila Abada and Jota as well. Postecoglou has a certain way of playing where wingers are massively important in the makeup of that side. So, you know, if James Forrest can stay fit, as he clearly is at the moment, I know he's obviously had his injuries, but, you know, there's no reason, especially if other players are going to be out, why he can't get a run in that side and do well in that team. Celtic are so attack-minded that you would imagine that certainly the 100 assists is going to come from sooner rather than later.
God, it makes me feel old to think that I was working at the game when he came on and scored that first goal in 2010. Oh my God. But like, see, even over the course of 12 years now, he still doesn't seem like he's like this legend of the club. He's not, as far as I'm aware, he doesn't have like a song from the fans. He's not like, he's just sort of like one of these players that fans sort of take for granted as just being there, and just this sort of like evergreen player that you always know what you're going to get with him. He's just always around the place. Is that kind of the harsh reality of like being a one club man? Is it not actually that glamorous?
I think there's maybe a slight argument for that. I think it's also, you know, contextually, you're saying he's a one club man. He's come through pretty much round about the same time as Callum McGregor as well. And I just think he's, for the Celtic support, a much easier person to pin this kind of like persona onto, about like, you know, club captain, and he carries the club, and just the nature of the way that McGregor plays, you know, that kind of central midfielder that does everything on the park. I think maybe that's where Forrest's contributions have been lost a little bit at times. I think also when you think back to Scott Brown being part of that midfield for a long time too, with Brown and McGregor, I would say that's probably the two that Celtic fans kind of hinged this mythos and these personas onto, and that kind of cult character status. James Forrest maybe got slightly left by the wayside. It's an interesting thing about the one club man, because it's such an unusual occurrence now. I think back to when I was growing up in the 90s, it was a very common occurrence for players to get testimonial matches, like to go into a testimonial year, which signifies 10 years service to a club. You think of how infrequently that happens now. It kind of gives you a marker of how rare an achievement this is. The one that stood out for me was Keith Lasley. I know he kind of had a couple of seasons down south, not really doing much. But he's Mr. Motherwell. I've obviously seen it from the inside, and you see just what it means to everyone inside the club as well, to have a one club man and a legend like that. And when he left in the summer to go to St Mirren, there was a void, and you could feel that void around the place. And it was even something as simple as you just expected to hear his voice down the corridor. And obviously I wasn't there for the whole 20 odd years that he was at the club, but he still just became this, I don't want to say piece of the furniture, because that maybe sounds like he's not
held in stature, but he was just such a big part of the club in every area that you go to. And it's nice to see that from the flip side, from what you don't normally see from the fans. But anyway, moving on. The other scores across Saturday's games. Livingston beat St Johnstone 1-0. Another 1-0. And this time it was for Livy, Andrew.
I was going to say, yeah, I think that's 3 wins. Their last 3 wins, not 3 wins in a row necessarily, but their last 3 wins have all been 1-0. Yeah, I mean, the Tony Macaroni's a difficult place to get a result. Generally speaking, their form there is quite good. I think the margins are relatively fine for Livingston in quite a lot of their games. It's always a 1-goal swing one way or the other, or perhaps a draw as well. But, you know, I mean, Livingston are ticking along. I like the way David Martindale goes about his business, and he's got a team there that is quite compact and works hard, and, you know, they've got a big test coming up going to Rangers, but and, you know, I think the argument will be that they're probably due to do something against Rangers at some point, and they're certainly in good form at the moment. So, you know, why can't they go to Ibrox and get something? That's what they'll certainly believe. And yeah, good result for them. St Johnstone a little bit unlucky, and it's a result that keeps them obviously down at the bottom end of the table as well.
Yep, and also Ross County 1, Dundee United 1. Tony Watt strikes again, Finn. That's 3 in 4 games now for him. And United seem to be getting back on track again. 3 games without a defeat now for them.
Yeah, and they're good quality results, I think, as well. You know, beating Aberdeen 4-0, beating what was a high-flying Hibs up until that point 1-0. And then I think they may be a bit disappointed about not getting more from the game against Ross County, but Dingwall can be a tricky place to go to. So, yeah, the important thing is to just keep trying to build on that. They've got a little bit of momentum now, and it's, you know, like you're saying, 3 goals in 4 games for Tony Watt. Now, it seems to be, if Tony Watt's playing well, Dundee United are doing well. I was just pausing there in case you wanted to come in on Tony Watt, because I know you love talking about Tony Watt.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I've had enough of Tony Watt in my life, it's fine. Don't need to talk more about him. In Paisley, St Mirren drew 0-0 with Kilmarnock. Not the most exciting game of the weekend, but the Buddies are happy. They had 450 more fans at that game than they were seeing in the 2-0 win against Celtic a few weeks ago. I know we covered it in a couple of episodes ago when St Mirren announced that they weren't going to be given over one of the stands when Celtic and Rangers came to town. Obviously that was a bit controversial at the time, ruffled a few feathers, but it seems to be working. If that's them building up their fan base and they're seeing results like that, Andrew, surely it's working for them. This is a great turnaround.
Yeah, I mean, do you know, when this started happening sort of 2-3 seasons ago, I think Hibs did it and Hearts did it as well, where they said, no, we're only going to give you so many tickets because I think quite a lot of the time the thinking has been that they don't want away fans taking over the ground, rather than they've got a load of home fans to fill the seats. And I know that's changed a little bit, more so at Tynecastle, I think, but I find that stance to an extent. I can understand it from a sporting advantage point of view, if you like, but in these times, I don't think there are that many clubs that are in the position to be able to turn down the money. Now, in St Mirren's case, I know that they put the season ticket prices up a little bit to cover the difference, if you like, and I can see why Celtic fans, Rangers fans were a bit miffed at not getting tickets. But do you know what? This is one of the positive outcomes from that situation, where slowly but surely the figures are going up a little bit. I mean, St Mirren have had a pretty reasonable start to the season, and clearly that's reflected by the fact that they're getting now 450 fans. Doesn't sound like an awful lot to some people, but do you know what? That's maybe another 10% on the gate, or, you know, close to that, and that's a fairly significant number of people. It suggests that some things are being done the right way at St Mirren, and that's something that ultimately, if they can keep going in that direction, they will be rightly applauded for.
On Sunday, Aberdeen beat Hearts 2-0. Finn, I saw Duke's assist described on Twitter as having the intensity of a charity match. What went on here? What was going on?
I think this was for the second goal. It just, the legs had gone by that point for Hearts. Just as we were talking about, I think it's a bit of a fallout from the European hangover, so to speak, of the ending, because they kind of had stayed in the game. It was 0-0 with 15 minutes to go, and then Aberdeen scored 2 goals in 4 minutes. But it was the nature of the second one. So Duke was running through on goal. To say he was unchallenged is a bit of an understatement. I think you kind of got Hearts players just trundling back, and Duke was able to just saunter forward across the pitch diagonally, played the ball through for Vicente Bessugen, and he just picked his spot in the back of the net. Yeah, it was just, I think just Hearts have really, really struggled with the 2 games a week. You can see that by their league form. You can see it by the injuries that they've started to rack up as well. I think, the away days are a lot of fun for the fans, and they've had some good trips, but I think Hearts will be glad when the European adventure is over and they can knuckle down just trying to get back to winning ways in the league.
Moving into the Championship, Morton getting their 3rd win from 3 games, beating Wraith Rovers 1-0. They haven't looked back since the 5-1 drubbing at the hands of Partick Thistle at the start of the month. Hamilton Accies, though, they are rooted to the bottom of the table with no wins in the last 4. They lost 2-1 to Partick Thistle at the weekend. What's going on there, Andrew?
Not very much in the way of good stuff, because I think as well as 4 defeats in a row, I think it's 1 win in 11 matches they've got as well. So, obviously John Rankin's gone in there in the summer. Difficult job. And you've obviously seen this with some clubs when they've been in the Premiership or the SPL as it was previously for a few years and then dropped out of the league. We've seen it with Falkirk as well. It's not necessarily a given that you just come straight back up. Inverness have been a bit like that as well, where they haven't necessarily come straight back up. I know they have yo-yoed a little bit, but it's not guaranteed that when you drop out of the top flight that you're just going to cruise to the title and be back amongst it 12 months later. And Hamilton certainly have found that, and they're at the wrong end of the table now. Right above them in the standings are Arbroath as well, who had such an excellent campaign last season, and suddenly they're looking like a relegation contender as well. So it's a difficult division to get out of, the Championship, and what you have to be careful with, because traditionally over the last few years it has been quite a tight division. We saw that last season as well. It was very tight for such a long time. If you don't do well in it, you can find yourself at the bottom very, very quickly. So a big job for Hamilton to get themselves back on track, and while it can be a tight division, it's like everything else. If they don't hurry up and get themselves going, they can find themselves detached and isolated quite soon.
Yeah.
In League One, it was Dunfermline taking the points in the top of the table clash. They beat FC Edinburgh 1-0. They're still unbeaten this season, 6 wins and 4 draws. And in League Two, it was the Beanos that moved to the top of the table. Stirling Albion beat Stenhousemuir 3-1. Dumbarton, though, they're keeping the pressure on. They've been struggling of late with no wins in the last 4 after starting the season so strongly. They're keeping the pressure on. They had a 1-1 draw with Albion Rovers at the weekend, and they're only second because of a lesser goal difference, so still tight in League Two.
Regrets? No, it's good laugh on it. So
I didn't find it funny.
It's here. Whether you like it or not, VAR is making its long-anticipated debut in Scottish football on Friday night. Hibs versus St Johnstone will be the answer to many pub quiz questions in years to come, because it's the first domestic game in Scotland where VAR is officially used. And then the technology will then be rolled out across the other Premiership games over the rest of the weekend. Finn, we're already almost a third of the way through the season. What could possibly go wrong here?
I don't think anything will. I think it will be absolutely flawless. I think there won't be any controversy. There won't be any teething problems. Like most things
Welcome to Scottish football.
Yeah, like most things in Scottish football, I think it will be absolutely nothing but plain sailing. No, I'm nervous. I mean, we've been through all of this before. We've been through why on earth are they introducing it halfway through a season? Not even halfway. It's like, well, we've got it, so we might as well use it. It just, again, feels like that thing from Jurassic Park. It's like, just because people could doesn't necessarily mean that they should, but they've never stopped to think about that. So, yeah, I'm nervous about it. I think in terms of the actual, when you break it down, the SPFL's approach to VAR has felt a little bit like, rather than buying the actual proper version, it feels like we've got the VAR version of it's okay, there's chalk ices in the freezer. Do you know what I mean? And I think it kind of doesn't really work. I mean, on paper, if we've got this many worries about it, in practice, I just can't see it being anything other than a bit of a disaster. But we'll see what happens. There are far fewer cameras, I think, with Scottish VAR than there are in most others. I think we've only got 6 cameras. So again, that only gives you a certain amount of coverage. And I think I've read as well that we're not, like, some of the games won't have a camera on the goal line as well. Is that right?
Yeah, there's no goal line technology. Yeah, it is a minimum of 6 cameras, so it might be more than that. But I think it's absolute madness bringing it in at the moment. Scottish football is notoriously bad for not doing itself a favour, and I think this falls massively into that category. We're not even at a point where, so I was looking at the table, and you know, some teams have played 11 matches, so you know, you're thinking, right, okay, so it's everybody's played once, each other once, but it's not that, because I think Hearts and 2 or 3 other teams have only played 10 matches, so they've not played everybody yet. I mean, I remember years and years and years ago when Inverness first came up into the SPL as it was then, they had to obviously play at Pittodrie because their ground wasn't ready, and their ground was eventually ready in about like the October, but the insistence then was that they had to play everybody at home once and away once before they would be allowed to leave Pittodrie and go back to their own stadium, which, in the interest of fairness and sporting integrity, which is a phrase which Scottish football fans are very familiar with, made a bit of sense. I don't see how this is going to lead to anything other than people kicking off about it, because sure enough, at the start of the season, when VAR wasn't ready, pretty much every single week there's been some kind of incident that would have gone the other way if it was VAR. Even at the weekend, I was looking at goals from the weekend's matches, and there's a handball claim in the Ross County Dundee United match. I think the ball comes off, I think it's Ryan Edwards' arm. Now, VAR would give that as a penalty, letter of the law, but the referees the referee and the assistant referees have all missed it, and the penalty hasn't been given, despite 5-6 Dundee United players all claiming for it at the time. Now, I'm a big fan of helping referees. I think ultimately Scottish football will absolutely benefit from it. I think the referees will benefit from it as well. Like, I don't even think we should bring it in this season. I think it should be next summer. I don't even think it's a halfway through the season job, because the Scottish Premiership doesn't have a halfway point because of the way it is with the kind of 3 games against everybody and then the split. There's no halfway point. If it's not ready for the start of this season, you bring it in next season. You don't bring it in now. I think it's nuts to do it just now.
The BBC did a good documentary on it in the build up to this, called, I think it was VAR Friend or Foe, something along the lines of that. Really interesting to see they got let into Fir Park to have a look at the squads for the team meeting while the refs talked them through it all. So you were seeing what the players were seeing and stuff, and they were showing the instance of, like, this is what would happen in this circumstances, and the players were talking back and debating it almost. Really interesting insight. But what I found really interesting, even more so, was when the refs are actually together in the truck discussing certain incidents, and it's the level of discussion that goes into the most minute part of, like, was it his toe? Like, was it his, is it his shoelace? There's so much debate over and over of, did he play the ball? Like, the man in yellow played the ball. No, the man in black played the ball. Who's playing the ball there? And it's like, see, if there's that much debate over it, it's not a clear and obvious mistake. Surely we shouldn't be getting down to the forensic science of a challenge. I mean, I was working the West Ham Fulham game last week, and there was a decision that took at least 4 minutes to go to VAR review. And you're standing there, you're like, am I missing something here? Why is this clock still going on? And you've still not decided yet. See, if it's taking you 4 minutes to make a decision, it's not clear and obvious. Just carry on, because it shouldn't be getting this level of scrutiny, surely.
The thing is with that as well is it's not the system that it's the problem, because I think we saw at the Euros, for instance, the VAR was utilised really well, and it was slick and it was quick. And you didn't have these massive delays. So the technology itself is sound. It's fine. The problem is the people that are using the technology. So in that instance there that you're talking about, Laura, that's clearly people are chewing over something, which, as you say, if it's not an obvious mistake, then you let it go. The fact that Scottish football isn't going to have the goal line technology, and it's a slimmed down version, and it's essentially the budget version, because it's a money decision. It's just going to make it really, really difficult. I mean, like, I work at Sky Sports News, and when it was introduced to the Premier League, Sky Sports are based in Isleworth, which is kind of just off the M4 in West London. Stockley Park, which is where the Premier League have their VAR base, is out in Hayes, which is not a million miles away. It's just next to Heathrow. So I think we had 3 days where there were different slots offered for people to go and check it out. Now, I know that because I'm based in London, I've not been involved in this, but Scottish journalists have been invited along to see the same thing and see how it works, and so that they have an understanding of it when they're writing about it or talking about it in broadcast. That's great, but there are going to be so many mistakes. There are going to be so many things where, guaranteed, if it's not in the Hibs and Johnson game, it will be one of the other games that weekend. There will be a goal line technology incident where if the technology had been there, you'd get a goal, but because it's not there won't be a goal. You know what I mean? That's just the way it works in Scotland, where if something can go wrong, it will go wrong, and that's probably what's going to happen. So with the environment being the way it is in Scotland, we need all the help we can get in situations like that. But I also think that with it being a slimmed down version and not the full package, it's sometimes going to leave us with more questions than answers.
Well, the Wish version of VAR is coming into play in the semi-finals and the finals of the Cups this season. So you've really got to hope that nothing controversial happens in the quarterfinals this week. But it's Scottish football, so let's expect nothing other than that, really. That's all from us. Thank you, as always, for listening. If you're a fan of the show, why not leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from? And while you're at it, come and give us a follow on Twitter as well. We're at TSFS Podcast. Stands for the Scottish Football Show, obviously. Thanks to Finn. Thanks to Andrew for your company this week. We'll see you again next Tuesday.